Here's another quadratic equation. Remember, we said that we're going to look at three possible methods to use for solving quadratic equations. And the method we choose is going to depend upon what terms are present. If all three terms of the typical quadratic equation are there, second power term, first power term, constant, we said we were going to use the quadratic formula for solving that quadratic equation. If we're missing the first power term, as we are in this equation, we just have the second power term, the constant. If we're missing the first power term, we said we were going to apply the square root property. And if we are missing the constant, which would mean we would have an equation where we only had the second power term and the first power term, we're going to try to factor that polynomial to solve that equation. So here I want to apply the square root property. So when we apply the square root property, remember we want to get something squared equals a constant. And that something that's being squared has to have a coefficient of 1. Well, here I have something squared, don't I? I have an x being squared. If I get rid of the constant and move it to the other side by subtracting 128, I have something being squared equals a constant, but my something has a coefficient of 2, which I can eliminate by dividing both sides by 2. Now I have the condition for the square root property. Something squared, in this case a single variable x is being squared, equals a constant. So that quantity that was being squared, which in this case is the single variable x, is equal to plus or minus the square root of the constant. And as soon as we see that we're taking the square root of a negative, that immediately tells us we've entered into the realm of the imaginary numbers. And the square root of negative 64, I'm going to first break apart into the square root of 64 times the square root of negative 1. And remember, the square root of negative 1 is represented with lowercase I, and the square root of 64 is 8. So our two solutions to this quadratic equation are the two imaginary solutions, 8i and negative 8i. And because the first power term was missing, this equation was perfectly prepared for me to apply the square root property in order to solve it.